Human waste. That's what you are, Dad. You contaminate my life just by existing. This asylum will be your tomb. Those were the words of my son, Ethan, as he dragged me through the cold hallways of the Pines the day I turned 72. I never imagined the special outing he promised would end this way. My name is Andrew Wilson, and today, as I gaze at old photographs in my new apartment in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., I still struggle to believe that my own son, the person to whom I dedicated 45 years of sacrifices, could transform into the cruel man who locked me away as if I were garbage. But to understand how we reached this point, I must return to that Tuesday, March 17th, 2024, my 72nd birthday. I woke that morning with the naive hope of an old man who still believed in filial love. Ethan had called me 3 days earlier, unusually animated, promising he had prepared the best gift of my life. His voice sounded different, almost enthusiastic. Now, I understand it was the excitement of someone about to free himself from a burden. Dad, I'll pick you up at 10 a.m. on Tuesday. Dress nicely. We're going somewhere very special, he had said. I remember perfectly how my heart filled with foolish hope. Maybe, I thought, we could finally reconnect. The last 5 years had been distant since he inherited his mother's company, my late wife, Beatrice, who passed away 7 years ago. That morning, I bathed carefully, shaved, put on my best light blue shirt and the gray trousers I saved for important occasions. I prepared coffee and waited by the window of my apartment on the Upper East Side, New York City, watching the street. At 10 o'clock sharp, Ethan's black Audi pulled up in front of the building. I went downstairs with a smile on my face. My son got out of the car, dressed in a dark suit and a red tie. He hugged me briefly, a mechanical embrace that I should have recognized as an alarm signal, but I was blinded by anticipation. "Happy birthday, Dad. Today will be a day you'll never forget," he said, with a smile that I then interpreted as affection. How right he was, though not in the way I imagined. During the hour-long drive towards the outskirts of New York City, I tried to converse. I asked him about Paige, my 19-year-old granddaughter, about the business, about Natalie, his wife. He responded in monosyllables, his gaze fixed on the road. I attributed his silence to work stress. How naive I was. I noticed small, strange things. Ethan constantly checked his watch, drummed his fingers on the steering wheel impatiently, and when I tried to turn on the radio, he practically slapped my hand to turn it off. "I prefer silence," he said harshly. I swallowed uncomfortably, but remained quiet. We started climbing a winding road into the hills. The landscape was beautiful, trees on both sides, clear blue sky, but something in my stomach began to churn. We passed a sign that read, "The Pines Retirement Home, 2 miles." I thought perhaps Ethan did volunteer work there, that he was taking me to see the place. My mind still sought innocent explanations. When the car stopped in front of a 3-story beige building with white bars on the windows, my confusion grew. "What are we doing here, son?" I asked in the softest voice possible. He turned off the engine, took a deep breath, and for the first time looked directly into my eyes. What I saw in that gaze froze my blood. Absolute coldness, contempt, almost relief. "Dad, this is your new home," he said with terrifying calm. Before I could process his words, he got out of the car, walked around the vehicle, violently opened my door, and grabbed my arm forcefully. "Come on, don't make this harder," I pleaded. "Ethan, I don't understand what this means. It's a joke." My voice trembled. He didn't respond, simply dragged me towards the entrance. I tried to pull free, but at 72, my strength was no match for his. At the reception, a woman in her 50s, in a white uniform, greeted us with a professional but uncomfortable expression. "Mr. Wilson?" she asked, looking at Ethan. He nodded. "Yes, I'm bringing my father, Andrew Wilson, for permanent admission. Everything is already arranged." The words "permanent admission" exploded in my brain like fireworks of horror. "Ethan, what are you saying? I'm not sick. I don't need to be here," I shouted, trying to free myself. The receptionist looked at us uncomfortably, clearly accustomed to these scenes. My son dragged me down a long hallway, smelling of disinfectant and institutional food. I screamed, pleaded for explanations, begged him to listen. He remained silent, jaw clenched, until we reached a small room with a single bed, a metal wardrobe, and a barred window overlooking a grey inner courtyard. He pushed me inside. Then he finally spoke, and his words were burned into my memory forever. "Listen to me closely, Dad, because this is the last thing I'll ever tell you. You're worthless now. You're human waste that only contaminates my life with your existence. Every time I see you, every call from you, every obligatory visit reminds me of everything I could have if you didn't exist. This asylum is where you belong. Here you'll rot until death finally takes pity on me and takes you away." I was paralyzed, unable to breathe. My own son, whose diapers I changed, whom I taught to ride a bicycle, for whom I worked 70 hours a week for years to pay for his education at the prestigious Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire, investing $160,000. He looked at me with a hatred I had never seen directed at me. Before I could respond, Ethan advanced towards me and began to strip me of my belongings. He took my cell phone from my pants pocket. "You won't need this." He took my wallet with my documents, my bank cards, the photographs of Paige I always carried. "Not this either." He even removed the wristwatch Beatrice gave me on our 20th anniversary. "Ethan, please, son, let's talk. Whatever I did to upset you, I'm sorry. We can fix this," I begged, tears beginning to roll down my cheeks. He let out a cruel, hollow laugh, empty of any humanity. "Fix? There's nothing to fix, old man. You simply stopped being useful. Goodbye, Dad. Enjoy your living tomb." He walked out of the room and locked the door from the outside. I stood there in the middle of that cold cell, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway, then the sound of his car engine starting, and finally silence. I collapsed onto the bed, my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. But something strange happened in that moment of absolute despair. My civil engineer's mind, trained for 50 years to analyze structures and problems, began to function with unexpected clarity. I didn't cry uncontrollably. I didn't scream anymore. Instead, I closed my eyes and began to remember, to observe, to record every detail of what had just happened. Ethan's exact words, his body language, the way the receptionist seemed uncomfortable, the fact that my son had said, "Everything is already arranged," as if he had planned this in advance. I opened my eyes and methodically observed the room, the barred window, the locked door, the complete absence of my belongings. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a precisely executed plan. And it was at that moment, sitting on that hard bed in an asylum that smelled of loneliness and abandonment, that I made the most important decision of my life. If my son believed he had destroyed me, if he thought I would give up and die quietly in this geriatric prison, He was profoundly mistaken. I would not seek blind revenge. I would seek something much more powerful: the truth, justice, and perhaps, just perhaps, a lesson my son needed to learn before his soul was completely lost in darkness. But for that, I would need time, patience, and above all, to keep a cool head. Because if my engineering career had taught me anything, it was that the best structures are built with careful planning, not impulsive reactions. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath, and began to observe everything around me with new eyes. Not the eyes of a victim, but the eyes of a strategist who had just received the most important challenge of his life. And what Ethan didn't know, what he could never have imagined in his worst nightmares, was that the director of this asylum, the man who signed the admission papers, was Jonathan Miller, my best friend for 43 years. But my son would discover that very soon. The first few days at the Pines passed with a slowness that would have broken any lesser man. But I, Andrew Wilson, had built bridges that supported tons of weight. I knew that true resistance is not measured in shouts, but in the ability to maintain lucidity when everything crumbles. The morning after my confinement, a young nurse entered my room. Her name was Rose Mendez, as I read on her ID. She carried a tray with institutional breakfast, watered-down coffee, dry toast, individual jelly packets. She observed me with that mixture of pity and professionalism she surely applied to all admitted elders. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson. How are you this morning?" she asked softly. I could have shouted the truth. I could have told her my son had kidnapped me against my will, but something inside me warned me to be strategic. "Good morning, Rose," I replied, with a calm that surprised even myself. "I could be better, but I appreciate your kindness." She blinked, clearly not expecting coherence from someone supposedly suffering from severe dementia. During those first 3 weeks, I established a meticulous routine. Every morning, I woke at 6. I did gentle exercises in my room. I groomed myself carefully. When staff entered, I conversed with them politely, asked about their families, remembered their names. I wanted everyone to see that my mind was working perfectly. Rose became my main source of information. One afternoon, while she brought me medication that I pretended to take but hid under my tongue to spit out later, I casually asked, "Rose, did my son speak with you when he brought me in?" She hesitated uncomfortably. "Mr. Wilson, I shouldn't—" "Please," I insisted gently. "I just want to understand what he told you. I have a right to know, don't you think?" She sighed, looking towards the door to ensure no one was listening. "Your son explained that you requested to come here voluntarily. He said you'd become aggressive lately, that you had violent episodes, that you'd forget important things like leaving the stove on. He showed us supposed medical reports indicating advanced Alzheimer's." Every word was a carefully constructed lie. I felt rage boiling in my veins, but kept my face serene. "And what do you think, Rose? Do I seem aggressive or demented to you?" She looked me directly in the eyes for the first time. "Honestly, Mr. Wilson, you're the most lucid and kind patient we have on this wing. That's why your file confuses me so much." I smiled sadly. "Thank you for your honesty. It means more than you can imagine." During the long, lonely nights, my mind traveled to the past, searching for answers. Where had I failed as a father? I clearly remembered the day Ethan was born, June 22nd, 1979. Beatrice sweated, exhausted after 14 hours of labor. When the doctor placed that tiny baby in my arms, I cried with happiness. "You'll be a great man," I whispered to him. "I promise." I fulfilled that promise with absolute sacrifice. I worked from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. Every dollar I earned as a civil engineer, I invested in giving Ethan the best. Education at the prestigious Phillips Exeter Academy in New Hampshire, costing $3,700 monthly. Piano lessons, swimming, advanced English, educational trips to London. All told, I invested over $160,000 in his upbringing. But now, analyzing with painful clarity, I saw the errors. When Beatrice died 7 years ago from pancreatic cancer, Ethan inherited her textile import company, valued at over $500,000. I insisted he take it, thinking it would give him stability. Instead, it gave him power he couldn't handle. The changes were gradual. First, visits became spaced out. Then conversations became transactional. "Dad, I need you to sign these papers." "Dad, lend me $40,000 to expand the business." I always complied, blinded by paternal love. 5 years ago, when Ethan turned 40, I noticed him change, becoming more arrogant, materialistic, obsessed with appearances. He drove expensive German cars, wore Italian suits, dined in restaurants where a meal cost $200. When I asked if everything was going well financially, he responded with irritation. "I'm perfectly fine, Dad. Stop treating me like a child." The clearest sign came 2 years ago. Paige, my granddaughter, came to visit me crying. "Grandpa, Mom and Dad argue all the time about money. Dad says you're a hindrance, that when you're no longer around, he can sell your properties and live comfortably." I comforted her, thinking they were words spoken in a moment of stress. How naive. Now, locked in this cold room, the puzzle pieces fit with brutal clarity. Ethan didn't admit me out of medical concern. He admitted me because I am an obstacle between him and my assets. The 3 commercial properties in prime areas of New York City that I bought with decades of work, valued at $850,000, the $320,000 in investments, the bank accounts with savings I accumulated living modestly. One afternoon, on the 10th day of my confinement, I had a revealing conversation with Carol, another nurse in her 60s. She was cleaning my room while I watched through the barred window. "Mr. Wilson," Carol said suddenly, "I've been working in retirement homes for 32 years. I've seen everything. And let me tell you something. You don't belong here. Your gaze is too clear. Your movements too sure. What's really going on?" I turned to her, evaluating whether I could trust her. I decided to take a risk. "Carol, my son brought me here against my will. He took everything from me, phone, documents, money. He told the staff I'm demented, but as you can see, I'm not." She nodded slowly. "I imagined as much. Do you have any family who can help you? Friends?" "I have a granddaughter, Paige, but Ethan probably told her I'm traveling or something. She's studying at university. She has no way of knowing where I am." I paused. "And I have friends, yes, but without a phone, no way to contact the outside." Carol interrupted me in a low voice. "The director of this asylum, Mr. Miller, is a fair man. He makes personal night rounds, checking that everything is in order. Perhaps, if you speak with him—" My heart skipped a beat. Jonathan Miller. How had I not thought of it before? When Rose mentioned the Pines on the first day, the name sounded familiar, but my brain was too traumatized to connect. Now I remembered, Jonathan had told me years ago that he managed a geriatric residence on the outskirts of New York City. "Carol," I said urgently, "Mr. Miller's first name is Jonathan." She nodded. "Yes, Jonathan Miller. Do you know him?" A small smile, the first in days, appeared on my face. Carol, Jonathan and I built the City Hall building in Philadelphia together in 1982. We've been friends for 43 years. Carol's eyes lit up. Then there's hope, Mr. Wilson. Mr. Miller passes by the rooms around 11 p.m. I'll be attentive. When he comes, I'll give you a signal. That night, I waited awake, my heart beating fast. At 11:15, I heard footsteps in the hallway. The door opened softly. A tall man of 68 entered, grey hair perfectly combed, metal-rimmed glasses. He wore a white medical director's coat and carried a clipboard. Our gazes met. I saw his eyes widen in absolute shock, disbelief transforming into recognition. "Andrew," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Hello, old friend," I replied, with a calm I didn't feel. "I suppose we have a lot to talk about." Jonathan closed the door behind him carefully, making sure no one else was in the hallway. His face had shifted from initial shock to a mixture of indignation and absolute confusion. He approached my bed with quick steps, placing the clipboard on the metal bedside table. "Andrew, for heaven's sake, what on earth are you doing here?" he whispered intensely. "I reviewed your file 2 hours ago when Carol alerted me that something strange was going on with the patient in room 214. When I saw your full name on the documents, I thought it was a mistake, a coincidence. Andrew Wilson cannot be admitted to my asylum as a patient with advanced dementia. I saw you 6 months ago at the anniversary of the Philadelphia City Hall construction, and you were perfectly fine." I sat on the bed, gesturing for him to take the only available chair. "Sit, Jonathan. What I'm about to tell you is hard to believe, but I need you to listen until the end without interrupting." He slumped into the chair, taking off his glasses to rub his eyes wearily. "Speak. I've known you for 43 years. I know when something is terribly wrong." For the next 20 minutes, I recounted everything. The false special birthday outing, Ethan's cruel words, how he stripped me of my belongings, the lies he told the staff about my supposed dementia and violence. Jonathan listened, jaw tense, the veins in his neck bulging with each revelation. When I finished, he remained silent for almost a full minute, processing the information. Finally, he spoke, his voice trembling with contained rage. "Andrew, this is kidnapping. Forced admission without legitimate medical cause. I can get you out of here right now. I'll call the police. I'll report your son for that." "No," I interrupted him with surprising firmness. He looked at me astonished. "Not yet, Jonathan." "What do you mean, not yet? They have you prisoner. Your son committed a serious crime." I breathed deeply, choosing my words carefully. "Listen, if we act impulsively now, Ethan will simply say it was a misunderstanding, that I consented to the admission and then got confused. He has false documents. He probably bribed some corrupt doctor to sign non-existent diagnoses. You know how the legal system works. It will be my word against his, and he has papers to back him up." Jonathan leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. "So, what do you propose?" "I need to observe more, to understand the full magnitude of what he's doing, because I suspect this isn't just spontaneous cruelty. Ethan planned this meticulously, which means there's more. He's probably trying to access my assets, forge documents, sell properties. If I leave now, he'll simply adjust his strategy and be more careful. But if I stay here a few more weeks, under your discreet protection, we can gather irrefutable evidence." Jonathan's face showed internal conflict between the impulse to help me immediately and the cold logic of my argument. Finally, he nodded slowly. You're right. It's what an engineer would do. Analyze the entire structure before intervening. But Andrew, I won't leave you in this miserable room for another day. He stood up with determination. First thing tomorrow morning, I'll move you to the third-floor suite, the one we reserve for relatives of patients who visit for long periods. It has a private bathroom, television, internal phone. Officially, you'll still be a patient, but in reality, you'll be my protected guest. How much of your assets is your son targeting? I leaned against the cold wall. 3 commercial properties in New York City, together valued at $850,000. Investments in government bonds and stocks worth approximately $320,000. Savings accounts with about $235,000 accumulated over 40 years of work. Total, around $1,400,000. Jonathan whistled softly. A powerful motive to lock up a father. Does he currently have access to any of that? Not directly, but if he manages to have me declared mentally incompetent through those false documents I mentioned, he could request legal guardianship and take control of everything. That's why it's crucial that he doesn't know you and I know each other. As long as he believes I'm completely isolated, vulnerable, and without resources, he'll feel secure enough to act, and every action he takes will be evidence. Jonathan walked to the window, observing the dark courtyard. You mentioned you have important documents. Where are they? I smiled for the first time with genuine cunning. In the double compartment of my wallet, Ethan took it from me. Yes, but he was always careless with details. He probably tossed it into some drawer in his office without thoroughly checking it. If we can retrieve it, we'll find reduced photographic copies of property deeds, access codes to my safe deposit box at Santander Bank, and the direct phone number of Edward Stone. Edward Stone? The corporate lawyer? The same. My personal lawyer for 22 years. He has copies of all my legal documents, wills, powers of attorney. Yes, Jonathan, you can contact him discreetly on my behalf. He can begin a silent investigation into Ethan's activities. Edward is meticulous, a former prosecutor. He'll know exactly what to look for. Jonathan returned to the chair, now with the expression of a military strategist. All right, this is what we'll do. First thing tomorrow, I'll move you to the suite. I'll tell the staff you need special isolation due to episodes of nocturnal agitation requiring direct supervision. That will justify my frequent visits without raising suspicion. I'll provide you with a basic cell phone that only you and I will know about. From there, you can contact Edward. Perfect. But there's something more important, Jonathan. I need you to document everything about my admission. The absence of a legitimate prior medical evaluation, the statements Ethan made to the staff, any irregularities in the paperwork. If this eventually goes to court, we'll need institutional proof that this was fraud from the start. He nodded vigorously. I have full access to files. I can make copies of everything without anyone noticing. Additionally, I'll install a small security camera in your new room, officially for medical monitoring. In reality, it will record anything we need. We remained silent for a moment, processing the magnitude of what we were planning. Finally, Jonathan spoke, his voice laden with emotion. Andrew, when we worked together in Philadelphia building that city hall in 1982, we were young. You were 30. I was 26. We spent 18 months mixing concrete under the scorching sun, welding beams 13 feet high, sleeping in shared barracks. We shared bottles of cheap wine, stories about our wives, dreams of the future. You taught me that the foundation of any solid structure is integrity. I never forgot that lesson. I felt a lump in my throat, and you taught me that true friendship is tested not in moments of celebration, but in moments of crisis. Jonathan extended his hand. I took it firmly. You'll get through this, brother. Not only free, but victorious. Your son will learn that he completely underestimated the man he tried to bury alive. I'm not seeking destructive revenge, Jonathan. I'm seeking educational justice. I want Ethan to understand the consequences of betraying trust, of valuing money over humanity. If there's any possibility of salvation for his soul, it must come through confronting the full truth of what he did. Jonathan stood up, gathering his clipboard. Then we'll help him find that truth, even if it hurts. Rest now, Andrew. Tomorrow begins your true liberation, though Ethan doesn't know it yet. When the door closed behind my friend, I lay back on the bed, feeling for the first time since my abduction something akin to hope. I was not alone. I was not defenseless, and most importantly, I had time to build a response as solid and unbreakable as the bridges I designed for half a century. Ethan thought he had defeated me in a single move, but real chess is played over many moves with strategic patience, and I had just made my first important move. The morning of the next day marked the beginning of my transformation from victim to strategist. Jonathan kept his word with military efficiency. At 7 a.m., 2 nurses entered my room with a wheelchair, explaining to the shift staff that the director had ordered my transfer to Suite 312 for specialized supervision needs. The new room was another world compared to the cell where Ethan had locked me. It was almost 300 square feet, with a large bed, a small brown leather sofa, a wooden desk, a flat-screen television, and large, unbarred windows overlooking a rose garden. The private bathroom included an adapted shower and a vanity with a full mirror. It was essentially a modest but dignified apartment. Jonathan appeared 20 minutes later, locking the door from the inside. From his medical bag, he extracted a basic Nokia cell phone, a charger, and a small notebook. The phone is registered to the asylum's foundation, impossible to trace back to you. It has prepaid credit for 200 hours of calls. Use it exclusively for essential contacts. I took the device with hands that trembled slightly from contained emotion. Technological freedom after weeks of absolute isolation. Jonathan, I have no words to thank you. He waved a dismissive hand. Brothers don't thank each other, they support each other. Now let's talk strategy. You need to contact Edward Stone as soon as possible. But first, we need to consider what exact information you need him to investigate. I sat at the desk, opening the notebook to a clean page. My engineer's brain went into structural planning mode. First, I need Edward to review all bank accounts under my name. If Ethan tried to access them, there will be digital traces. Banks record every attempted login, every request for information, every suspicious movement. Jonathan nodded as I wrote. Second, he must verify the legal status of my 3 properties. If Ethan is trying to sell or mortgage them, he'll need to forge my signature on deeds. That leaves notarial evidence. Third, I want to know if he filed any judicial request for guardianship or legal incapacitation based on those false medical diagnoses. And regarding your wallet, Jonathan asked, you mentioned documents hidden in the... I closed my eyes, visualizing every detail of that brown leather wallet I used for 15 years. In the secret compartment behind the card section, there are reduced photographs of the property deeds for Park Avenue, Fifth Avenue, and Madison Avenue. Also, the six-digit code for my safe deposit box at Santander Bank branch on Alcala Street, and Edward's business card with his direct number handwritten on the back. Jonathan furiously took notes. Do you think Ethan checked that compartment? My son inherited many things from his mother, but attention to detail was not one of them. Beatrice was organized and meticulous. Ethan was always impatient, acting on impulses. He probably emptied the wallet of visible cards and cash, assuming he had everything. The secret compartment requires pressing two side buttons simultaneously while sliding the... It's not obvious, so it's likely those documents still exist. Where do you think he kept your belongings? I reflected, recalling Ethan's personality. Knowing his ego, he probably left them in his company office, the one he inherited from Beatrice in the Wall Street financial district. He likes to have trophies of his victories nearby. Besides, if he plans to forge documents, he would need to study my signature, which means keeping samples accessible. Jonathan stood up, walking to the window. Edward could hire a private investigator to retrieve that wallet. Or better yet, if we get evidence that it contains your stolen documents, the police could obtain a search warrant. Not yet, I repeated firmly. Every premature action will alert Ethan that there's resistance. I need him to feel absolutely secure, invincible, so he'll make increasingly bigger mistakes. Confident criminals are careless criminals. Jonathan returned to the sofa, studying me with admiration mixed with concern. Andrew, I understand the logic, but to remain here voluntarily while your son believes he has destroyed you, are you sure you can emotionally handle it? The question was valid. During these weeks, I had cried in nocturnal solitude. I had felt my heart break every time I remembered the little boy who used to hug me, shouting, "Dad," when I came home from work. But something bigger than my personal pain was at stake. Jonathan, if I give in now to the impulse to escape and report him, Ethan will receive legal punishment. Yes, perhaps a few months in jail, a financial fine, a criminal record, but his soul will remain rotten. His understanding of what he did will remain superficial. There will be no real transformation, only resentment for having been caught. I stood up, feeling absolute conviction. But if I build this correctly, if I document every lie, every betrayal, every act of cruelty, and then present it to him not only as legal evidence, but as a moral mirror, there's a microscopic chance that something in him will awaken, that he will look into that mirror and finally see the monster he became. And if there is even a 1% chance of saving his humanity, it's worth the additional suffering. Jonathan had tears in his eyes. You're a better man than I, brother. I would just want to destroy him. Destruction is easy. Reconstruction is the real challenge of engineering, whether of buildings or human souls. We spent the next hour elaborating a detailed plan. Jonathan would contact Edward that same afternoon using a secure phone from his private office. He would explain the complete situation, sending him photographs of my fraudulent file as preliminary proof. Edward would begin an immediate discreet investigation into suspicious financial movements. Additionally, Jonathan would install a miniature security camera in my suite, officially for medical monitoring. In reality, it would record our strategic meetings as documentary backup. He would also provide me with internet access via a personal tablet, allowing me to research relevant laws regarding forced admission, fraudulent guardianship, and elder rights. One more thing, I said as Jonathan prepared to leave. I need you to record conversations with staff about what Ethan told them during my initial admission, his false statements about my supposed violence and dementia, testimonies from Rose, Carol, whoever interacted with him. Every documented lie is future ammunition. Consider it done, Jonathan replied. Rose has already expressed doubts about your diagnosis. I'm sure she'll testify if necessary. After Jonathan left, I sat at the desk with the cell phone in my hands. I had Edward's number memorized after 22 years of professional relationship, but I decided to wait until Jonathan made initial contact. It was important for Edward to receive the full context before hearing my voice, to avoid emotional reactions that could compromise the investigation. Instead, I opened the notebook and began to write a detailed chronology of events. Exact date of my admission: Tuesday, March 17th, 2024. Approximate time, 11:30 a.m. Ethan's verbatim words: "You're worthless now. You're human waste that only contaminates my life with your existence. Every detail, every gesture, every potential piece of evidence." I also wrote reflections on my history with Ethan, the beautiful moments, his first day of school at age 5, crying and clinging to my leg until I convinced him to be brave, his university graduation with honors in business administration, the pride I felt, his wedding to Natalie, dancing awkwardly to a waltz while I laughed, the birth of Paige, when he called me at midnight, excitedly shouting, "Dad, you're a grandpa," but also the dark moments I ignored out of blind love. When I caught him at 16 stealing money from Beatrice's wallet, when he brutally fired a housekeeper for accidentally breaking an expensive plate, when he mocked a homeless man on the street in front of Paige, teaching her contempt. The signs were always there. I simply refused to see them, blaming stress, external influences, anything but accepting that my son was developing corrupt values. That night, lying in a comfortable bed with clean sheets, I stared at the ceiling, thinking of Beatrice. If she were alive, would she have prevented this? Or would Ethan also have betrayed her to inherit faster? The second option terrified me more. My phone vibrated. A message from Jonathan. "Contacted Edward. He's coming tomorrow disguised as a social consultant. Be ready." I smiled in the darkness. The pieces on the chessboard were beginning to move. Edward Stone arrived at the asylum exactly at 10 a.m. the next day, dressed in a discreet grey suit and carrying a black leather briefcase that identified any corporate consultant. He was 55, with perfectly cut, salt and pepper hair and that penetrating gaze of a lawyer who had spent 20 years in the prosecutor's office before establishing his private practice. Jonathan personally accompanied him to my suite, introducing him to the staff as a specialist in geriatric patient rights, conducting a quality audit. No one questioned the explanation. When the door closed behind them, Edward dropped all professional pretense and hugged me tightly. "Andrew, my God, when Jonathan told me yesterday on the phone, I was awake all night. I couldn't believe Ethan was capable of something like this, but after what I investigated in 24 hours, his voice broke slightly. He took a deep breath, regaining his composure. "Sit down. I have a lot to report, and none of it is good." The three of us settled around the desk. Edward opened his briefcase, extracting a thick folder with documents marked with colored tabs. His meticulous organization was legendary among his clients. "Let's start with the latest bombshell," he said, opening the blue section. "Your son attempted to access your 3 main accounts at Santander Bank using powers of attorney he fabricated himself. He forged your signature on notarized documents, claiming you granted him full legal power over your finances due to progressive cognitive decline. Fortunately, your branch manager, Victor Olson, knows you personally from 18 years. He found the signatures suspicious and temporarily blocked access, requesting additional verification. I felt relief mixed with horror. Victor had saved me without knowing it. Does Ethan know he was blocked? Yes. According to Victor, your son threw a furious scene at the branch 10 days ago, shouting that it was a family emergency, that he needed the funds for your urgent medical treatment. Victor stood firm, explaining that bank protocol requires personal confirmation from the account holder in cases of such significant changes. Ethan threatened to sue him. Jonathan intervened, his voice filled with contempt. So he's been actively trying to steal for more than 2 weeks. It wasn't a momentary impulse. It's a planned campaign. Edward moved to the yellow section. Now, the properties. Your 2020 Mercedes-Benz was sold 3 weeks ago to a used car dealership in White Plains, New York, for $16,000. Ethan used a copy of the vehicle's documentation, which he apparently had access to, signed as an attorney-in-fact, and received cash payment. The dealership didn't verify properly because the transaction seemed legitimate on the surface. My car, I murmured. I bought that Mercedes celebrating my 70th birthday, a gift to myself after decades of austerity. Recoverable, difficult. It's already been resold to a third-party buyer. We could litigate, but it would take years. Better to use it as criminal evidence of misappropriation. Edward continued, his face growing grimmer. But here's what's truly alarming. Your commercial apartment on Park Avenue is in the process of being sold. Ethan found a buyer willing to pay $400,000. He already signed a purchase agreement, again using forged documents. The final notarization is scheduled for 6 weeks from now before a notary in New York City. If that goes through, you'll lose a property valued at almost $500,000. The air left my lungs. How do we stop that? By filing a formal complaint with the Notary Association. I've already drafted the document. I just need your signature authorizing me. The notary is obligated to verify the seller's personal identity before notarizing. When they discover the fraud, not only will the sale be cancelled, but there will be documented evidence of the attempt. I took the pen Edward extended to me, signing with a trembling but determined hand. What else? Edward exchanged a meaningful glance with Jonathan before opening the red section. Andrew, your daughter-in-law Natalie, visited this asylum exactly 2 weeks ago. She spoke with Dr. Ryan, the general practitioner here. Jonathan nodded gravely. I reviewed the notes from that conversation yesterday. Natalie tried to convince Dr. Ryan to increase your psychiatric medication, specifically strong antipsychotics that would induce genuine confusion and cognitive deterioration. She alleged you were dangerous, that you had threatened violence. They wanted to actually turn me into what they claimed I already was, I whispered, feeling nauseous. To drug me until the lie became reality. Exactly. Fortunately, Dr. Ryan is an ethical professional. He rejected the request, explaining that he only prescribes medication based on direct medical evaluation, not on family requests. But here's the worst part. Jonathan took a small recorder from his pocket. I have the asylum facilities monitored for security. Natalie didn't know there was a microphone in the waiting room. Listen to this. He pressed play. Natalie's voice emerged, crystal clear and unmistakable. Doctor, understand the situation. My father-in-law is hindering our financial plans. As long as he's lucid, he can block transactions we need to complete. If you could just help him to be calmer, more confused, we would make a generous donation of $5,000 to this asylum. No one needs to know the details. Dr. Ryan's voice responded coldly. Madam, What you are suggesting is bribery to commit medical malpractice. I ask you to leave my office immediately. Sound of hurried footsteps, a door closing violently. Jonathan turned off the recording. Documented bribery attempt, Edward said with dark satisfaction. This is a serious felony. Natalie could face up to 4 years in prison. I remained silent, processing the depth of the conspiracy. It wasn't just Ethan acting impulsively. It was a coordinated operation with Natalie to chemically and legally incapacitate me, systematically stealing everything I had worked for over half a century. Is there more? I asked, though part of me feared the answer. Edward nodded heavily. Ethan filed a preliminary judicial request to have you legally incapacitated. He used the false medical diagnoses he obtained, God knows how, probably by bribing some unscrupulous doctor. The hearing is scheduled for 2 months from now. If the judge approves the incapacitation without your presence defending yourself, Ethan would obtain complete legal guardianship, total control over your person and assets. Then we have 2 months to build a complete counterattack, I said, feeling determination crystallizing. Edward, I need you to document absolutely everything. Every attempt at bank fraud, every forgery, every bribe. We will build a criminal case so solid it will be irrefutable. I'm already on it. But Andrew, Edward looked directly at me. Why not get out now? We have enough evidence to arrest Ethan and Natalie today. Why wait? I stood up, walking to the window, overlooking the garden. An elderly man walked slowly among the rose bushes, pushed in a wheelchair by a young nurse. I thought of all the elderly parents betrayed by greedy children, reduced to objects, to monetary obstacles. Because I want Ethan to go all the way, I replied, without turning around. I want him to execute his plan completely, to believe he has won, to savor that false victory. Only then, when he is most confident and vulnerable, will we show him the full mirror of his monstrosity. The fall from a greater height generates a greater impact, and only an absolute impact has a microscopic chance of genuine transformation. Edward slowly closed his folder. You're playing chess while your son is playing checkers. He has no idea of the opponent he's facing. My son taught me something unintentionally, I said, turning to them. He taught me that paternal love has limits, that there comes a time when you must choose between protecting your child from consequences or protecting him through consequences. I have spent 72 years choosing the first option. It's time to choose the second. Jonathan approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. And what if this doesn't change him, Andrew? If it's too late for his redemption? Then at least I will prevent him from destroying others. Paige, future partners, employees, anyone who crosses his path. Sometimes saving a soul means first breaking it completely, to rebuild it from solid foundations. The three of us remained silent, united by a common purpose. Edward finally spoke. I will continue investigating. Every week I'll bring you updates disguised as audits. We will document everything down to the last detail. After they both left, I sat down at the desk with the cell phone in my hands. I had Edward's number memorized after 22 years of professional relationship, but I decided to wait until Jonathan made initial contact. It was important for Edward to receive the full context before hearing my voice, to avoid emotional reactions that could compromise the investigation. Instead, I opened the notebook and began to write a detailed chronology of events. Exact date of my admission. Tuesday, March 17th, 2024. Approximate time, 11:30 a.m. Ethan's verbatim words, "You're worthless now. You're human waste that only contaminates my life with your existence. Every detail, every gesture, every potential piece of evidence. I also wrote reflections on my history with Ethan, the beautiful moments, his first day of school at age 5, crying and clinging to my leg until I convinced him to be brave, his university graduation with honors in business administration, the pride I felt, his wedding to Natalie, dancing awkwardly to a waltz while I laughed, the birth of Paige, when he called me at midnight, excitedly shouting, "Dad, you're a grandpa," but also the dark moments I ignored out of blind love, when I caught him at 16 stealing money from Beatrice's wallet, when he brutally fired a housekeeper for accidentally breaking an expensive plate, when he mocked a homeless man on the street in front of Paige, teaching her contempt. The signs were always there. I simply refused to see them, blaming stress, external influences, anything but accepting that my son was developing corrupt values. That night, lying in a comfortable bed with clean sheets, I stared at the ceiling, thinking of Beatrice. If she were alive, would she have prevented this? Or would Ethan also have betrayed her to inherit faster? The second option terrified me more. My phone vibrated. A message from Jonathan. Contacted Edward. He's coming tomorrow disguised as a social consultant. Be ready. I smiled in the darkness. The pieces on the chessboard were beginning to move. Edward Stone arrived at the asylum exactly at 10 a.m. the next day, dressed in a discreet grey suit and carrying a black leather briefcase that identified any corporate consultant. He was 55, with perfectly cut, salt and pepper hair and that penetrating gaze of a lawyer who had spent 20 years in the prosecutor's office before establishing his private practice. Jonathan personally accompanied him to my suite, introducing him to the staff as a specialist in geriatric patient rights, conducting a quality audit. No one questioned the explanation. When the door closed behind them, Edward dropped all professional pretense and hugged me tightly. "Andrew, my God, when Jonathan told me yesterday on the phone, I was awake all night. I couldn't believe Ethan was capable of something like this. But after what I investigated in 24 hours, his voice broke slightly. He took a deep breath, regaining his composure. "Sit down. I have a lot to report, and none of it is good." The three of us settled around the desk. Edward opened his briefcase, extracting a thick folder with documents marked with colored tabs. His meticulous organization was legendary among his clients. "Let's start with the latest bombshell," he said, opening the blue section. "Your son attempted to access your 3 main accounts at Santander Bank. Using powers of attorney, he fabricated himself. He forged your signature on notarized documents, claiming you granted him full legal power over your finances due to progressive cognitive decline. Fortunately, your branch manager, Victor Olson, knows you personally from 18 years. He found the signatures suspicious and temporarily blocked access, requesting additional verification." I felt relief mixed with horror. Victor had saved me without knowing it. Does Ethan know he was blocked? Yes. According to Victor, your son threw a furious scene at the branch 10 days ago, shouting that it was a family emergency, that he needed the funds for your urgent medical treatment. Victor stood firm, explaining that bank protocol requires personal confirmation from the account holder in cases of such significant changes. Ethan threatened to sue him. Jonathan intervened, his voice filled with contempt. "So he's been actively trying to steal for more than 2 weeks. It wasn't a momentary impulse, it's a planned campaign." Edward moved to the yellow section. "Now the properties. Your 2020 Mercedes-Benz was sold 3 weeks ago to a used car dealership in White Plains, New York, for $16,000. Ethan used a copy of the vehicle's documentation, which he apparently had access to, signed as an attorney in fact, and received cash payment. The dealership didn't verify properly because the transaction seemed legitimate on the surface. "My car," I murmured. "I bought that Mercedes celebrating my 70th birthday. A gift to myself after decades of austerity." "Recoverable?" "Difficult. It's already been resold to a third-party buyer. We could litigate, but it would take years. Better to use it as criminal evidence of misappropriation." Edward continued, his face growing grimmer. "But here's what's truly alarming. Your commercial apartment on Park Avenue is in the process of being sold. Ethan found a buyer willing to pay $400,000. He already signed a purchase agreement, again using forged documents. The final notarization is scheduled for 6 weeks from now before a notary in New York City. If that goes through, you'll lose a property valued at almost $500,000. The air left my lungs. How do we stop that? By filing a formal complaint with the Notary Association. I've already drafted the document. I just need your signature authorizing me. The notary is obligated to verify the seller's personal identity before notarizing. When they discover the fraud, not only will the sale be cancelled, but there will be documented evidence of the attempt." I took the pen Edward extended to me, signing with a trembling but determined hand. "What else?" Edward exchanged a meaningful glance with Jonathan before opening the red section. "Andrew, your daughter-in-law Natalie visited this asylum exactly 2 weeks ago. She spoke with Dr. Ryan, the general practitioner here." Jonathan nodded gravely. "I reviewed the notes from that conversation yesterday. Natalie tried to convince Dr. Ryan to increase your psychiatric medication, specifically strong antipsychotics that would induce genuine confusion and cognitive deterioration. She alleged you were dangerous, that you had threatened violence. They wanted to actually turn me into what they claimed I already was," I whispered, feeling nauseous. "To drug me until the lie became reality." "Exact. Fortunately, Dr. Ryan is an ethical professional. He rejected the request, explaining that he only prescribes medication based on direct medical evaluation, not on family requests. But here's the worst part." Jonathan took a small recorder from his pocket. "I have the asylum facilities monitored for security. Natalie didn't know there was a microphone in the waiting room. Listen to this." He pressed play. Natalie's voice emerged, crystal clear and unmistakable. "Doctor, understand the situation. My father-in-law is hindering our financial plans. As long as he's lucid, he can block transactions we need to complete. If you could just help him to be calmer, more confused, we would make a generous donation of $5,000 to this asylum. No one needs to know the details." Dr. Ryan's voice responded coldly. "Madam, what you are suggesting is bribery to commit medical malpractice. I ask you to leave my office immediately." Sound of hurried footsteps, a door closing violently. Jonathan turned off the recording. "Documented bribery attempt," Edward said with dark satisfaction. "This is a serious felony. Natalie could face up to 4 years in prison." I remained silent, processing the depth of the conspiracy. It wasn't just Ethan acting impulsively. It was a coordinated operation with Natalie to chemically and legally incapacitate me, systematically stealing everything I had worked for over half a century. "Is there more?" I asked, though part of me feared the answer. Edward nodded heavily. "Ethan filed a preliminary judicial request to have you legally incapacitated. He used the false medical diagnoses he obtained. God knows how. probably by bribing some unscrupulous doctor. The hearing is scheduled for 2 months from now. If the judge approves the incapacitation without your presence defending yourself, Ethan would obtain complete legal guardianship, total control over your person and assets. Then we have 2 months to build a complete counterattack, I said, feeling determination crystallizing. Edward, I need you to document absolutely everything. Every attempt at bank fraud, every falsification, every bribe. We will build a criminal case so solid it will be irrefutable. I'm already on it. But Andrew, Edward looked directly at me. Why not get out now? We have enough evidence to arrest Ethan and Natalie today. Why wait? I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the garden. An elderly man walked slowly among the rose bushes, pushed in a wheelchair by a young nurse. I thought of all the elderly parents betrayed by greedy children, reduced to objects, to monetary obstacles. Because I want Ethan to go all the way, I replied without turning around. I want him to execute his plan completely, to believe he has won, to savor that false victory. Only then, when he is most confident and vulnerable, will we show him the full mirror of his monstrosity. The fall from a greater height generates a greater impact, and only an absolute impact has a microscopic chance of genuine transformation. Edward slowly closed his folder. You're playing chess, while your son is playing checkers. He has no idea of the opponent he's facing. My son taught me something unintentionally, I said, turning to them. He taught me that paternal love has limits, that there comes a time when you must choose between protecting your child from consequences or protecting him through consequences. I have spent 72 years choosing the first option. It's time to choose the second. Jonathan approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. And what if this doesn't change him, Andrew? If it's too late for his redemption, then at least I will prevent him from destroying others. Paige, future partners, employees, anyone who crosses his path. Sometimes saving a soul means first breaking it completely to rebuild it from solid foundations. The three of us remained silent, united by a common purpose. Edward finally spoke. I will continue investigating. Every week I'll bring you updates disguised as audits. We will document everything down to the last detail. After they both left, I sat down to write a long letter for Paige. She deserved to know the truth eventually, but not yet. First, I had to complete this architecture of educational justice, brick by brick, proof by proof. My phone vibrated. A message from Jonathan. Rose reports that Ethan hasn't called once to ask how you are. 4 weeks of absolute silence. 4 weeks since he abandoned me here to die forgotten. I smiled bitterly. Perfect. Every day of abandonment was another line in the record of his cruelty. On the exact day I completed 3 months confined at the Pines, a rainy Thursday in mid-June, I heard desperate knocking on the door of my suite. It was 4 p.m. Jonathan had left for an administrative meeting at the City Hall. I was reading legal reports that Edward had left me that morning when the knocking became more insistent. Grandpa, I know you're here. Please open up. My heart stopped. Paige. It was Paige's voice, filled with anguish and determination. I stood up so fast, I momentarily felt dizzy, rushing to the door. I threw it open. There was my granddaughter, drenched by the rain, dark hair plastered to her face, eyes red from crying. She carried a university backpack over one shoulder, and in her hand she held a cell phone showing the asylum's address on the screen. We looked at each other for an eternal second before she threw herself into my arms, sobbing against my chest. "Grandpa, I found you. I finally found you." I hugged her, with a strength I didn't know I still possessed, feeling 3 months of concentrated pain flowing through that contact. "Paige, my child, how—" She pulled back slightly, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "Come in. We have a lot to— Does anyone else know you came? Only the reception staff, I suppose. Get in quickly." I closed the door, guiding her to the sofa. She dropped her backpack, observing the suite with a mixture of relief and confusion. "This place is— I didn't expect this. Dad said you were in a specialized clinic in Switzerland for experimental Alzheimer's treatment." "Your father lies extraordinarily well when it suits him," I replied, with a bitterness I couldn't hide. "Sit down, Paige. I need to tell you the complete truth before he discovers you found me." For the next half hour, I recounted everything. The false birthday outing, the cruel words, the stripping of my belongings, the forced isolation. She listened, her expression transforming from shock to horror to contained fury. When I mentioned Natalie's attempt to drug me through medical bribery, Paige stood up abruptly. I knew something was wrong. "Grandpa, 2 months ago, I started noticing strange things. Dad would come home with bags from expensive stores. Mum would wear new jewelry every week. They bought a new Audi A6 for $65,000, paying cash. When I asked where all the money was coming from, Dad said the company was prospering." She sat down again, taking a small notebook from her backpack. "But I'm studying psychology, Grandpa. I know how to recognize behavior patterns, so I started documenting." She opened the notebook, showing me pages filled with cramped handwriting. I recorded every big purchase, every trip, every strange expense. I took the notebook, reading with growing astonishment. Paige had meticulously documented April 3rd, trip to Dubai, 5 days, lavish hotel, estimated $8,500. April 16th, Mum buys a diamond necklace at an exclusive jewelry boutique, $19,000 according to a phone conversation I overheard. April 29th, Dad buys a Rolex Submariner watch, $13,500. The list continued page after page. At the end, Paige had calculated the total, $130,000 in 4 months. "Paige, this is pure gold as evidence. How did you know to look for me here specifically?" She smiled sadly. 3 weeks ago, I tried to call you. Your number was disconnected. I went to your apartment on the Upper East Side. Empty. Mail accumulating. I confronted Dad. He repeated the Switzerland story, but something in his eyes lied. I knew it with absolute certainty. She leaned forward, intensity burning in her gaze. "I started investigating on my own. I searched his office one night when he was out. I found documents, papers with your signature that looked strange, different, and I found payment receipts for this residence. 3 months prepaid for a total of $3,800 and then nothing. As if they had abandoned you here, expecting you to simply disappear." My throat closed with emotion. "You risked a lot, snooping around like that. If your father had found you—" "I don't care what Dad thinks," she said, with uncharacteristic vehemence. "You're my grandpa, the only one who taught me real values, who listened to me when everyone ignored me, who paid for my university when Dad said it was an unnecessary expense because women get married anyway. I owe you everything." Tears rolled freely down my face. "Now, Paige, you have to listen carefully. What I'm going to ask you is difficult, perhaps impossible, but it's crucial." She nodded seriously. "Anything, Grandpa. I need you to go back home and act as if nothing happened. You cannot reveal that you found me. You cannot confront your father. I need you to be my eyes and ears on the outside, documenting every move your parents make while I build a solid legal case against them. I saw conflict in her expression. You want me to pretend normalcy while I know they have you imprisoned here? I'm not imprisoned anymore, I explained. The director of this asylum, Jonathan Miller, has been my best friend for 43 years. He's protecting me, helping me gather evidence. I have a lawyer working on the case, but we need more time, more proof. If we act prematurely now, your father could escape full consequences. Paige processed the information, biting her lower lip, as she had done since childhood when reflecting deeply. So, this is a trap. You're letting Dad think he won while you prepare a counterattack. Exactly. But Paige, you must understand something. This will end with your father facing serious criminal charges. Jail, probably. Your mother too. Can you live with that? She looked at me without blinking. Grandpa, a month ago, I heard Mum say on the phone, the old man should just die quickly and save us trouble. She was talking about you. My own father calls you human waste when he thinks no one is listening. They're not my parents anymore. They're greedy strangers using your money to live luxury fantasies while you rot here. So yes, I can perfectly well live with seeing them pay. I hugged her again. You're stronger and braver than I was at your age, but this will be painful. Seeing them daily, feigning family love, while you know the truth. I'm already living it for weeks, she replied. At least now, I'll have a purpose. What specifically do you need me to document? We spent the next hour strategizing. Paige would continue her detailed expense diary. She would try to photograph documents if she gained access to Ethan's office again. She would record conversations when possible, using a recording app on her phone. She would report any strange meetings, suspicious calls, unusual behavior. I also added, keep in contact with my close friends, Phil Rogers, Mark Thomas, people who have known me for decades. Ask them to write sworn statements about my historical mental state, confirming that I never showed signs of dementia or violence. Those testimonies will destroy your father's false diagnoses. Paige furiously wrote in a new notebook I provided her. How often do we communicate? Use this number. I wrote my secret phone number on paper. Memorize it. Then destroy the paper. Call me only from private places, never from your house where they might overhear you. University library, public restrooms, parks, vary the locations. She memorized the number, repeating the digits until she mastered them. Then she tore the paper into minuscule pieces and flushed them down the toilet. When she returned, her expression was that of a soldier accepting a dangerous mission. One last thing, Grandpa. What happens to me at the end of this? When Dad and Mum are arrested, where do I end up? I took her hands in mine. Paige, you are innocent. You are also a victim of their lies. Whatever happens, I will protect you. I have resources, properties, investments that your father couldn't touch. Your education is secure. Your future is secure. You will never be alone. She cried silently, squeezing my hands. Thank you, Grandpa, for everything, for not giving up. The Wilsons don't give up, I replied with a small smile. Your Grandma Beatrice taught me that, and now you remind me. Paige stayed another half hour before the rain let up. When she finally prepared to leave, she hugged me one last time. I'll get you out of here soon, Grandpa. I promise. You already got me out, my child. You gave me hope and purpose. That's worth more than physical freedom. I watched her walk away down the hallway, backpack over her shoulder, head held high. In her, I saw a future, redemption, proof that not all was lost. If my lineage produced a monster like Ethan, it also produced an angel like Paige. That night, lying in the dark, I reflected on the strange balance of the universe. I lost a son, but I gained a warrior granddaughter. And perhaps, just perhaps, at the end of this painful road, I would regain something of that son too, or at least save his soul from total perdition. The last week of June marked the definitive turning point in my strategy. 3 exact months since my forced admission, and every piece of the puzzle finally fit with Swiss watch precision. Edward arrived that Monday at noon with a noticeably heavier briefcase than previous visits, his face exhibiting a mixture of professional satisfaction and moral disgust. "Andrew, we have everything," he announced, depositing the briefcase on my desk with a forceful sound. "Absolutely everything necessary to legally bury your son and Natalie. The question is no longer whether we can win, but how long you want them to suffer before we act." Jonathan entered moments later, locking the door. We had synchronized these meetings like a military operation. The 3 of us sat down as Edward spread out organized folders with numbered tabs from 1 to 15. "Let's start with the latest bombshell," he said, opening folder number 1. "Confirmed by a private investigator. Ethan stopped paying this asylum exactly after the initial 3 prepaid months. $3,800 was the total he disbursed. After that, absolute silence. He expected the administration to simply transfer you to an overcrowded public asylum, or worse, leave you on the street when they couldn't contact him." Jonathan intervened, his voice filled with disgust. "Indeed, we received 3 administrative calls attempting to contact Ethan about payment renewal. All went directly to voicemail. He intentionally avoided responding, assuming we would automatically dispose of the problem." "Premeditated abandonment," I commented coldly. "Add that to the file." Edward nodded, making a note on his tablet. Folder 2. Audio recording of Natalie attempting to bribe Dr. Ryan with $5,000 to medicate you psychiatrically. I have an official transcript certified by a forensic handwriting expert, a medical bribery felony, Article 429 of the State Criminal Code. Penalty, up to 4 years in prison. He continued methodically. Folder 3. Forensic analysis of bank documents proves that the signatures on the powers of attorney presented by Ethan were forged. I hired 3 independent handwriting experts. All 3 concur crude imitations of your authentic signature. Here are the technical reports with digital overlays showing discrepancies in stroke pressure, angles, proportions. Paige had sent me a photograph of one of those fake documents. Seeing it now, under professional analysis, was disturbing. My son had practiced my signature dozens of times until he created a version convincing to untrained eyes. But modern technology revealed every microscopic irregularity. Folder 4, Edward continued. Fraudulent sale of your Mercedes-Benz. I have a sworn statement from the dealership confirming that Ethan presented himself as the legal attorney in fact. He used apparently legitimate documentation. He received $16,000 in cash, which he never declared for tax purposes. Tax evasion added to misappropriation. Jonathan whistled softly. How many crimes do we have so far? 7 different ones so far, Edward replied without looking up from his notes. Folder 5. Attempted sale of the apartment on Park Avenue. I contacted the notary designated for notarization. He confirmed an appointment scheduled for July 23rd, exactly 3 weeks from today. Ethan already signed a purchase agreement, again using forged documentation. The notary accepted my formal complaint, blocked the transaction, and initiated an internal investigation. "Does the buyer know what's happening?" I asked. "Yes, a man named William Stone, a legitimate textile entrepreneur who believed he was making an honest deal. He's furious with Ethan, threatening to sue for damages and losses for making him waste time and resources on due diligence. He could be a valuable witness in court." Edward opened folder 6 with a particularly grim expression. "This is perhaps the most disturbing. Paige provided me with her diary documenting extravagant expenses from your stolen funds. I hired a forensic accountant to trace the exact origin of the money. Results: Ethan sold your Mercedes for $16,000 in cash. He withdrew $50,000 from a shared savings account you had with Beatrice, an account he inherited upon her death, but which he legally should not have touched until your passing, according to testamentary clauses." I felt a stab in my chest. That account was for Paige. Beatrice and I established it specifically for our granddaughter's university. I know. I read Beatrice's will, Clause 17, Paragraph 3. Funds remain intact until the death of my husband Andrew, at which point they will be transferred entirely to our granddaughter Paige Wilson for her higher education. Ethan violated his own mother's testamentary will. Jonathan stood up, walking to the window with his hands in his pockets. How can someone fall so low? Not only betray his father, but also profane the memory of his mother. "Greed dissolves bonds that love built," I said quietly. "Continue, Edward." Folder 7. Testimonial statements that Paige collected following your instructions. Phil Rogers, your bridge partner for 25 years, confirms that you play complex games, memorizing every card played. Mark Thomas, your gym buddy, testifies that you completed the Boston Marathon at 70 years old. Dr. Alice Morrison, your primary care physician of 18 years, provides a complete medical history, showing zero signs of cognitive deterioration in annual exams until last February, 1 month before your admission. Medical evidence completely contradicts the fraudulent diagnoses Ethan presented. In short, Jonathan summarized, exactly. Folder 8. Complete financial tracing of Ethan and Natalie's expenses over the last 4 months. Trips to Dubai and Paris, $12,000. Audi A6, $65,000 paid cash. Various jewelry, $23,000. Designer clothing, $8,000. Luxury restaurants, $7,000. Electronics, $4,000. Total documented by Paige, exactly $130,000. Edward looked directly at me. "Andrew, your son spent in 4 months of frivolities almost as much as you earned in 3 years as a civil engineer. Money stolen while he had you locked up, believing you forgotten." I breathed deeply, controlling the fury that threatened to overflow. What else? Folder 9. Judicial request for legal incapacitation filed by Ethan 6 weeks ago, based on medical reports I personally investigated. The supposed doctor who signed the advanced Alzheimer's diagnosis turns out to be Dr. Raymond Vance, a retired doctor who lost his license 3 years ago for gross negligence. He currently faces a prohibition from practicing medicine. However, he apparently sells signatures for money. "How much did Ethan pay him?" Jonathan asked. "According to bank records I obtained through a preliminary court order, $2,500 transferred to Vance's account on March 8th, 9 days before your admission. Payment for a false diagnosis, documented electronically." The folders continued. 10. Forensic psychological analysis requested by Edward. evaluating your current mental capacity through interviews we conducted here. Conclusion: cognitive functioning superior to 90% of men your age. 11. Testimonies from asylum staff, mainly Rose and Carol, confirming consistent lucid behavior during 3 months. 12. Complete asset investigation revealing your 3 commercial properties, investments, bank accounts. Total verified, $100,000. 13. Current will naming Ethan as principal heir, a document that obviously needs urgent modification. 14. Photographic chronology that Page compiled showing Ethan's modest lifestyle until March versus the explosion of luxury since April. 15. Audio recordings that Page secretly captured, where Natalie literally says, "When the old man finally dies, we'll sell everything and move to Palm Beach, Florida. Imagine the life we'll have with over $1 million free." When Edward finished, silence filled the room like a dense fog. 3 additional folders contained legal drafts, a complete criminal complaint, a request for a restraining order, and a new will completely excluding Ethan. "Andrew," Edward finally said, "you have in your hands the ability to completely destroy your son. A criminal process would result in a minimum of 5 years in prison, summing all the crimes. He will lose his company, reputation, family, everything. Are you absolutely sure you want to proceed?" I closed my eyes, visualizing the little boy Ethan once was, 5 years old, crying after falling off his bicycle, me bandaging his scraped knees while promising, "Dad will always protect you." But that child died long ago, replaced by a man who called me human waste. "Proceed with everything," I replied, opening my eyes, "but with one modification." Both looked at me questioningly. "I want to include in the will the possibility of redemption. If Ethan demonstrates genuine change through 500 hours of community service in elder care facilities for 5 consecutive years, documented weekly psychological therapy, and full restitution of the stolen money, he may receive a small monthly pension of $1,000. Not a full inheritance, but a dignified survival. Page will inherit 80% with the condition of helping him if he meets the requirements. Edward blinked in surprise. "After everything he did to you, you still give him a way out?" "It's not a way out. It's a last chance to save his soul. He'll probably reject it. He'll probably fail. But I need to know that I tried until the absolute end." Jonathan smiled sadly. "You're a better man than your son deserves. Perhaps, or perhaps, I am simply a father who cannot completely abandon hope." The first day of July dawned with a clear sky and a pleasant temperature of 72 degrees. A perfect day for freedom. At 9 a.m., a court officer knocked on the door of my suite, delivering a sealed envelope with the stamp of the Civil Court of New York City. Jonathan was present as a witness. "Mr. Andrew Wilson," the officer read, formally, "you are hereby notified that an immediate release order has been issued following a review of your case. You are released from institutionalization with immediate effect. Furthermore, a protective order has been issued against Ethan Wilson and Natalie Rubio, prohibiting direct or indirect contact with you under penalty of arrest." I signed the acknowledgement of receipt with a surprisingly firm hand. 3 months of planning were reaching their culmination, but this was just the beginning of the second phase: confrontation and consequences. Edward had coordinated everything meticulously. I would not return to any of my known addresses. Instead, I moved into an apartment I bought 15 years ago in a discreet neighborhood of Georgetown, Washington, D.C., a property Ethan never knew existed. A fourth property kept in absolute secret, a refuge I had planned precisely for unpredictable emergencies like this. The apartment was on the 5th floor of an old restored building on Alonzo Cano Street, 600 square feet, 2 bedrooms, a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined square, modest but comfortable. Jonathan personally accompanied me, helping me install basic furniture that Edward had purchased days earlier. "Are you sure you don't want to stay at my house?" Jonathan offered as we arranged clothes in a closet. "I have a guest room permanently empty." "I need independence," I explained. "This place represents a new beginning. Besides, strategically, it's better that Ethan can't trace me through known associations." As we organized, my cell phone rang. "Paige, Grandpa, Dad just received a large envelope by certified mail. He's pale, reading documents. I hear him mention a criminal complaint, forgery, a court order. I think your counterattack arrived." "That's right, my child. Stay alert, but safe. Do not intervene no matter what happens. Observe and report." 5 minutes later, Edward called. The 4 criminal complaints were delivered simultaneously. One to Ethan at his office, another to Natalie at the gym where she does Pilates, a third to the notary who was going to notarize the fraudulent sale, a fourth to Santander Bank. A preventive block was also executed on all your accounts against unauthorized access. Ethan will discover that he has been completely isolated from your assets. I hung up and looked at Jonathan. Now comes the interesting part. Ethan will try to contact me desperately. I didn't have to wait long. At 11 a.m., Rose called me from the Pines. "Mr. Wilson, a man claiming to be your son arrived 10 minutes ago, demanding to see you. He's yelling at reception, threatening to sue the asylum. We explained that you were legally released this morning, but he doesn't accept the answer. We called security." "Yes, Rose, and document everything. If he becomes violent, call the police." Half an hour later, Paige reported, "Grandpa, Dad came home like a hurricane. He broke a lamp, throwing it against the wall. He's shouting that someone betrayed him, that this is a conspiracy. Mom is crying, saying they urgently need a lawyer. Dad tried to call your old number, but it's obviously disconnected. Now he's calling all your known friends. No one is answering." I smiled with grim satisfaction. Phil, Mark, and the others had received instructions to completely ignore any contact from Ethan. The noose was tightening. At 2 p.m., Natalie appeared at Edward's office without an appointment. He called me from the bathroom while she waited at reception. "Andrew, your daughter-in-law is here, hysterical. She says she wants to negotiate, that it was all a terrible misunderstanding." "Should I see her?" "Record her if she agrees to speak, but make it clear that no negotiation is possible. The criminal charges have been filed. Only the prosecutor's office can withdraw them now, and they won't with such overwhelming evidence." Edward saw her briefly. As he recounted to me later, Natalie alternated between tearful pleas and veiled threats. "Andrew is senile, confused. We were just trying to protect him. This is elder abuse manipulated by you people." Edward simply handed her a copy of the audio recordings where she tried to bribe Dr. Ryan and spoke of waiting for the old man to die. Natalie left the office stumbling. The real blow came at 4 p.m. The prosecutor assigned to the case, a woman named Brenda Ross with a reputation for being implacable, summoned Ethan and Natalie for mandatory deposition on July 9th. Edward had presented such an exhaustive file that the prosecutor decided to proceed immediately without further investigation. Paige sent me a photograph of the summons Ethan left on the dining table. On it, a list of preliminary charges: illegal forced admission, forgery of public documents, attempted bank fraud, misappropriation, bribery of a medical official, violation of testamentary will, tax evasion. 7 serious crimes that combined could result in 8 to 10 years in prison. That night, settled in my new apartment, I prepared chamomile tea while reviewing documents Edward had left. The new will was ready for signature, completely drafted. Paige would inherit $120,000 in properties and investments. $200,000 would go to the Vulnerable Elders Protection Foundation, an organization dedicated to preventing abuse against seniors. $150,000 to Jonathan in gratitude for his unwavering 43-year friendship and invaluable help during my most vulnerable moment. The rest would cover legal expenses and an emergency reserve. Ethan would receive exactly $0 in direct inheritance, but as I promised, there was a redemption clause. If he completed 60 hours monthly of community service in elder care facilities for 5 consecutive years, attended weekly psychological therapy, with verified quarterly reports, and restituted every stolen dollar through monthly payments, he could receive a survival pension of $1,000 per month, administered by a trust that Paige would control. It was a generous offer, considering his crimes. He would probably reject it out of pride, but my conscience would be clear, knowing that I extended a final hand. Paige came to visit me around 8 p.m., using public transportation to avoid being followed. She brought homemade pot roast and mashed potatoes that she prepared, salad, freshly baked bread. We ate in silence initially, both processing the magnitude of what had been unleashed. "How are your parents?" I asked finally. She pushed food around on her plate. "Destroyed. Dad hasn't left his home office in hours. I hear him making frantic calls, probably looking for a lawyer willing to defend him. Mum packed a large suitcase. I think she plans to go to her sister in Boston. She's talking about divorce, about saving herself. Rats abandoning a sinking ship," I commented without emotion. Paige looked at me with bright eyes. "Grandpa, I know you did the right thing, but it still hurts. They're my parents, with all their horrible flaws. Part of me still remembers when Dad used to take me to the park, when Mum would do my hair for school parties. Does that just disappear?" I took her hand across the table. "It doesn't disappear, Paige. Those memories are real, part of who they were before greed corrupted them. But people change, not always for the better. Your pain is valid. Crying for who your parents were doesn't mean betraying me or justice." She nodded, tears rolling. "You cry for Dad every night," I admitted. "I cry for the child he was, for the man he could have been, for the relationship we lost. But that doesn't change what I must do. Sometimes the deepest love requires the hardest decisions." We stayed awake until midnight, talking about the future. Paige considered specializing in gerontology after this experience, working to protect vulnerable elders from family abuse. Her passion was inspiring. When she left, I stood on the balcony, observing the quiet square. Streetlights illuminated empty benches where, during the day, elders fed pigeons. I thought of all the elderly parents suffering similar betrayals in silence, without resources or knowledge to defend themselves. My phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "Dad, it's Ethan. Please, we need to talk. This is a terrible misunderstanding. I love you. Call me." I blocked the number without responding. Then another message from a different number. "Andrew, it's Natalie. Ethan was confused. I tried to help you. Please drop the charges. Think of Paige." I blocked that one too. Edward had warned me they would attempt desperate emotional manipulation. I would not fall for it. A third notification, an email from a lawyer representing Ethan, requesting an urgent meeting to resolve the matter out of court before a public scandal. I forwarded the email to Edward with a simple note. You respond. My answer is no. I finally went to bed past 1 a.m., sleeping for the first time in months without nightmares of abandonment. Because now the abandoned one was not me. It was my son, facing consequences he built with his own cruel hands. On September 9th, 2 months after my release, the day of the preliminary court hearing arrived. Courtroom number 3 of the criminal court in New York City, an imposing grey stone building in Foley Square. Edward picked me up at 8 a.m., and we reviewed the final strategy together during the taxi ride. Remember, Andrew, remain calm no matter what Ethan or his lawyer say. Judge Monroe is known for valuing composure and coherence. We have prepared this meticulously, but your personal impression will be crucial. We arrived 30 minutes early. The courtroom was still empty, rows of polished wooden benches, an elevated dais where the judge would preside, American and state flags flanking the judicial shield. We took seats in the front row on the left side. Jonathan arrived 10 minutes later, dressed in a formal dark suit. Paige entered alone, avoiding looking directly at me to not show obvious favoritism before testifying. At 9 a.m. sharp, the back doors opened. Ethan entered with his lawyer, a hefty man in his 60s named Richard Kent, known for defending lost causes with aggressive tactics. My son looked haggard, 20 years older than his 45. His suit was wrinkled, his dark circles deep, his hands trembling slightly. Our gazes crossed for an interminable second. I saw in his eyes a mixture of terror, rage, and something akin to a plea. I averted my gaze. Natalie did not appear. Her lawyer, a young woman named Patricia Sands, presented a medical certificate alleging an acute nervous breakdown that prevented her attendance. The judge frowned, but temporarily accepted her absence. Preliminary hearing in criminal case number 2024-3512. Prosecutor Brenda Ross versus Ethan Wilson and Natalie Rubio. Charges: illegal forced admission, document forgery, fraud, misappropriation, bribery of a medical official, violation of testamentary will, and others. Please rise. Judge Martha Monroe entered. A woman in her late 50s, with silver hair, pulled back, reading glasses hanging from a gold chain. Her reputation was fair, but inflexible. She sat down, adjusting her microphone. Prosecution may proceed with the presentation of preliminary evidence. Prosecutor Ross stood up, a woman in her 40s with an imposing presence. For the next hour, she systematically presented cases. She projected a complete timeline on a large screen. March 17th, forced admission. Testimonies from Rose and Carol, nurses who declared that Ethan had described non-existent violence and dementia. Forensic analysis of forged signatures. The audio recording of Natalie attempting to bribe Dr. Ryan, played in the courtroom at high volume. When Natalie's voice filled the room, saying, $5,000 to medicate him more strongly, I need him to be confused, I saw Ethan sink in his chair. Several spectators in the public gallery murmured in indignation. Jonathan testified first. I have known Andrew Wilson for 43 years. We built the City Hall building in Philadelphia together in 1982. He is a man with a photographic memory, a brilliant, analytical mind. When I discovered he was admitted to my asylum under a false diagnosis of dementia, I was horrified. For 3 months, I observed his daily behavior. He never showed a single sign of cognitive deterioration. He played chess with me. We discussed international politics. He solved advanced crosswords. His admission was complete fraud. Lawyer Kent attempted to cross-examine. Isn't it convenient, Mr. Miller, that you, being a friend of the alleged victim, provided him with a privileged room and helped him fabricate this accusation against a loving family? Jonathan looked at him with chilling coldness. What would have been convenient, counselor, would have been to immediately report the fraud to authorities. I did not do so because Andrew convinced me to methodically document every aspect of his son's criminal conspiracy. And thanks to that strategic patience, we have irrefutable evidence. Rose and Carol testified afterward, corroborating everything. Rose added a devastating detail. Ethan Wilson never called once in 3 months to ask about his father. Not once. He stopped paying after the initial period, as if he had thrown out trash, expecting someone else to pick it up. I have worked with elders for 12 years. I have seen negligence, but never such calculated abandonment. Edward presented bank records showing fraudulent access attempts. Victor Olson, Santander bank manager, testified about the forged powers of attorney and Ethan's erratic behavior when they were blocked. It was Paige's turn. My granddaughter walked to the stand with a dignity that filled me with pride. She swore to tell the truth, placing her hand on the Constitution. Her voice was firm. Prosecutor Ross gently guided her. Paige, please explain to the court your relationship with the accused. Ethan Wilson is my biological father. Mr. Andrew Wilson is my paternal grandfather. And what did you observe in the months following your grandfather's admission? Paige opened her diary, reading with a voice full of controlled emotion. My parents suddenly lived like millionaires. International trips, luxury cars, expensive jewelry. When I asked where the money was coming from, Dad said the company was prospering, but I reviewed the company's financial statements that he left in his office. The company was losing money, not earning it, so I started systematically documenting. She presented photographs, receipts, notes, total verified $130,000 in 4 months. This money did not come from honest work. It came from robbing my grandfather while he was locked up, believing himself abandoned to die. Kent tried to attack. Miss Wilson, isn't it true that your grandfather promised you a substantial inheritance if you testified against your father? Paige looked him directly. My grandfather offered me unconditional support because he always has. I testify against my father, not for money, but because I witnessed his crimes and cannot live with that silent complicity. I am a psychology student. I understand manipulation, abuse of power, and economic violence against the vulnerable. My father committed all those acts. Finally, I was called to the stand. I walked slowly, aware of every gaze. I swore to tell the truth, sitting opposite Judge Monroe. Prosecutor Ross asked, Mr. Wilson, describe in your own words the events of March 17th, 2024. I breathed deeply. For the next half hour, I recounted everything chronologically. The promise of the special outing, the drive to the Pines, the brutal revelation, Ethan's exact words, "You're worthless now," your human waste that contaminates my life, the stripping of my belongings, the confinement, the complete isolation. At any point, did you request or consent to this admission? The prosecutor asked. Never. It was premeditated kidnapping. My son planned every detail to get rid of me while stealing my assets. Kent tried to discredit me. Mr. Wilson, isn't it true that you suffered episodes of confusion, that you forgot important things? Counselor, I am 72 years old. Occasionally, I forget where I left my keys. That does not constitute dementia. I can recite from memory my 50 most important engineering projects, exact dates, budgets, technical specifications. Would you like me to demonstrate? Judge Monroe almost smiled. That won't be necessary, Mr. Wilson. I presented medical reports from 3 independent doctors, all confirming full mental capacity. Dr. Alice Morrison, my physician of 18 years, testified that my latest cognitive exams in February showed excellent functioning. When Ethan was finally called to testify, his lawyer tried to have him remain silent, invoking his right not to incriminate himself. The judge allowed silence, but ordered, "The accused may choose not to testify, but the court notes his silence and will consider it when evaluating the evidence presented." Ethan stood up briefly, looked toward where I was, and for the first time in months, I saw tears rolling down his cheeks. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but Kent tugged his arm, sitting him down again. Judge Monroe reviewed her notes extensively. Finally, she spoke. The evidence presented by the prosecution is overwhelming and consistent. Multiple testimonies, forensic documentation, audio recordings, expert analysis. Everything points to a systematic criminal conspiracy to fraudulently incapacitate Mr. Andrew Wilson and appropriate his assets. Given the weight of the evidence, the court orders the continuation of the criminal proceedings. Mr. Ethan Wilson will remain on conditional release with a prohibition from leaving the country, an obligation to report weekly to authorities, and an absolute restraining order of 500 feet regarding his father. The oral trial hearing is set for November 3rd. Court is adjourned. The gavel resonated in the silent courtroom. I left the courthouse surrounded by Edward and Jonathan. Paige hugged me on the steps. "You did it, Grandpa." "We did it," I corrected, kissing her forehead. Ethan emerged minutes later, surrounded by photographers. Someone had leaked the case to the press. Headlines on reporters' phones already read, "Elderly engineer denounces son for forced confinement and theft." My son sought my gaze in the crowd. Our eyes met one last time before his lawyer pushed him toward a waiting car. In that gaze, I saw something I didn't expect. Not rage, but the absolute devastation of a man confronting, for the first time, the monster he had become. 3 days after the preliminary hearing, I sat across from Public Notary Frederick Adams in his office on Fifth Avenue. A traditional office with mahogany shelves filled with legal codes, an antique desk polished to a shine, the official seal of the United States hanging on the wall. Edward accompanied me as a witness, along with Jonathan, who had insisted on witnessing this historic moment. "Mr. Wilson," the notary began, adjusting his glasses, "I have thoroughly reviewed the will you wish to formalize. I must confirm that you are completely sure of these provisions. They are unusual, to say the least." "Completely sure," I replied, with a firmness that surprised even myself. "This will represent not only asset distribution, but a final attempt at moral education." The notary nodded, beginning the formal reading. Public Will of Andrew Wilson, born in New York City on March 17, 1952. In full use of my mental faculties, as demonstrated by the attached medical reports, I dispose of the following regarding my estate, valued at approximately $400,000. First, I expressly revoke any previous will, codicil, or testamentary disposition. This document completely nullifies the previous will of January 15, 2018, where I named my son Ethan Wilson as principal heir. I felt the weight of those words. I drafted that previous will thinking of family continuity, assuming Ethan would protect the legacy I built. How naive I was. The notary continued. Second, I name my granddaughter Paige Wilson as principal heir, granting her 80% of my total estate, equivalent to approximately $120,000. This legacy includes the property on Park Avenue, the property on Fifth Avenue, investments at Santander Bank, and designated savings accounts. Paige, who had come directly from university, quietly sobbed. I squeezed her hand. Third, I donate $200,000 to the Vulnerable Elders Protection Foundation, an organization dedicated to preventing abuse against seniors. This donation is to be used specifically to create a program of free legal counseling for elders facing family mistreatment. It was a cause that gained profound meaning after my experience. If my story saved even one elder from suffering a similar betrayal, it was worth every moment of pain. Fourth, I donate $150,000 to Jonathan Miller in recognition of his unwavering 43-year friendship and his invaluable help during my moment of greatest vulnerability. Jonathan immediately protested. Andrew, it's not necessary. I did what any brother would do. That's precisely why you deserve recognition, I replied. Besides, these funds can improve the facilities at the Pines, benefiting future residents. The notary waited for us to calm down before continuing. Fifth, and this is the most complex clause, regarding my son, Ethan Wilson, I establish absolute disinheritance from the principal inheritance due to actions that constitute legal grounds for disinheritance according to relevant statutes of the state civil code, specifically severe psychological abuse, misappropriation of assets, and deliberate abandonment. The room fell silent. Even having discussed this extensively, hearing it formalized was shocking. However, the notary continued, reading carefully, I establish an extraordinary possibility of redemption through strict fulfillment of the following conditions for an uninterrupted period of 5 years. 1. Complete 60 verified monthly hours of community service in elder care facilities, personally attending to residents with dementia, paralysis, or conditions requiring intensive care. That specification was deliberate. Ethan had to directly experience what it means to care for vulnerable elders whom he himself planned to abandon. 2. Attend weekly psychological therapy with a certified professional, presenting verifiable quarterly progress reports. 3. Fully restitute every illegally appropriated dollar, including $16,000 from the sold Mercedes, $50,000 from Beatrice's account, and expenses documented by Paige totaling $130,000. Total to be restituted, $200,000 through minimum monthly payments of $3,000. Edward had calculated that these payments would take over 5 years to complete, ensuring sustained commitment. 4. Present a monthly authentic reflection letter about his actions, no less than 2 pages, demonstrating progressive understanding of the harm caused and genuine moral growth. These letters will be evaluated by a committee of 3 independent psychologists appointed by the executor of the will. If Ethan Wilson absolutely fulfills all these conditions for 5 consecutive years without fail, Paige Wilson will be authorized, not obligated, to provide him with a monthly pension of $1,000 through a trust administered by her. This pension is sufficient for a dignified but modest survival, teaching the value of money earned through effort and humility. Paige spoke for the first time. Grandpa, what if Dad rejects these conditions? Then he will receive exactly what he gave me at the Pines, Nothing, $0. But he will have had an option. He will have known a path to redemption, and if he chooses not to take it, it will be a conscious decision that reflects his true character. The notary concluded reading. Sixth, I name Edward Stone as principal executor, granting him an additional $50,000 for this work, which I anticipate will be complex and prolonged. Seventh, the property in Georgetown, Washington, D.C. is designated for Page as a personal, non-transferable residence for 10 years. Eighth, all expenses of this execution will be covered by a specifically designated reserve of $30,000. Do you wish to add any final personal statement? The notary asked. I had prepared this mentally for weeks. Yes, let it be on record. This will is not born of hatred, but of paternal love that recognizes its limits. I spent 72 years protecting my son from consequences, believing that love meant a shield against reality. I learned painfully that true love sometimes requires allowing consequences to teach lessons that words never could. If Ethan fulfills the conditions of redemption, he will demonstrate genuine transformation worthy of a second chance. If not, he will live knowing he had that opportunity and rejected it. In either case, I will have done my last duty as a father to offer a path to salvation without guaranteeing he will take it. I signed each page with a firm flourish. Edward and Jonathan signed as witnesses. The notary applied the official seals. The document is registered in the notarial protocol with number 583/2024. A certified copy has been deposited in the Registry of Wills and Testaments. It is legally formalized, the notary announced. From this moment, upon the death of the testator, these provisions are binding and irrevocable. We left the notary's office into the sunny September midday. Paige walked between Jonathan and me, her arm linked with mine. Grandpa, what do you think Dad will do when he finds out? I don't know, my child, but it's no longer my responsibility to predict or control his reactions. I planted a seed, provided water and light through these conditions. Whether it germinates or dies depends entirely on him. Edward took us to lunch at a quiet restaurant in Greenwich Village. During the meal, we discussed practical realities. Natalie had formalized her divorce 3 days after the preliminary hearing, taking half of the remaining marital assets and leaving Ethan with significant legal debts. The family business Ethan inherited from Beatrice was technically bankrupt. Creditors initiated seizure proceedings. Ethan had lost everything: family, reputation, financial stability, social respect. Paige reported that he was living alone in a modest rented apartment in Astoria, Queens, working as an administrative assistant at a hospital, earning $1,800 monthly. A fall from ostentatious executive to basic employee in 5 months, precisely what he needed to experience. The criminal process will culminate in November, Edward explained. The prosecutor is seeking a sentence of 5 years in prison. But given that you are an elderly victim, an aggravating circumstance could increase the penalty. More likely is 3 effective years with 2 conditional if he accepts guilt and avoids a prolonged trial. And can the community services from the will be fulfilled simultaneously with the criminal sentence? Jonathan asked. Yes, in fact, the judge could consider those voluntary community services as a mitigating factor, demonstrating genuine repentance. It would be strategically intelligent for Ethan to begin immediately before sentencing. We finished lunch late. Paige returned to university for an afternoon class. Jonathan went back to the Pines for an administrative meeting. Edward and I walked slowly through Central Park. enjoying the perfect autumn afternoon. "Andrew, you have built a brilliant legal architecture," Edward commented. "But the emotional architecture, how are you managing that?" I sat on a bench facing the pond. Some days, I wake up momentarily forgetting what happened, reaching for the phone to call Ethan and chat as before. Then I remember, and it hurts like a fresh wound. Other days, I feel relief at having finally acted after years of educational neglect. It's contradictory, complex, painful, but necessary. Do you think he will fulfill the conditions? Honestly, I don't know. Part of me desperately hopes he will. Another part prepares for final disappointment. But that uncertainty is precisely the point. He must choose. I cannot force transformation. I can only create conditions that make it possible. We remained seated until the sun began to descend, painting the sky with oranges and pinks. Life continued, indifferent to human dramas. And for the first time in decades, I felt at peace with decisions made, regardless of the final outcome. 11 months after that devastating Tuesday in March, when my son abandoned me at the Pines, I sat on the balcony of my apartment in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., watching February arrive with a fresh breeze and clear skies. It was Sunday morning, and the square below, filled with families strolling, elders feeding pigeons, children chasing balls. Ordinary life, beautiful in its simplicity. Jonathan would arrive in half an hour for our weekly lunch, which had become a sacred tradition. Paige was studying for her final exams of her last year in psychology, but promised to visit me that afternoon. My life had found a quiet, modest, deeply satisfying rhythm, in ways that years of abundance never achieved. The final trial had concluded in November, as Edward predicted. Ethan accepted a negotiated plea, avoiding a prolonged process. Sentence: 3.5 years in prison, with 2 conditional, meaning he would serve 18 effective months if he maintained good behavior, plus 500 hours of mandatory community service in geriatric institutions. Natalie received 2 conditional years for complicity and bribery, avoiding actual prison time, but left with a permanent criminal record. The family business Ethan inherited from Beatrice permanently closed in December. Creditors liquidated assets, barely covering 60% of debts. Ethan emerged from that financial shipwreck with nothing but the clothes on his back and the psychological burden of having destroyed his mother's legacy. But something unexpected happened in January that I was still emotionally processing. Paige called me one afternoon, her voice filled with contained emotion. "Grandpa, I need to tell you something about Dad, but I don't know how you'll react." My heart raced. "Tell me, Paige, whatever it is." I started volunteering at St. Mary's Haven as part of my university practicum. It's a place where patients with advanced Alzheimer's and severe dementia receive palliative care. I worked there Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, and Grandpa, I found Dad there. I stopped breathing for a moment. "What's he doing?" "Volunteering, Grandpa. Not the mandatory one from his judicial sentence, which he's fulfilling elsewhere under supervision. This is additional, genuine, voluntary work that no one forces him to do." I saw him helping an 80-something elder eat slowly, cleaning his mouth with infinite patience, speaking to him gently, even though the man didn't respond coherently. He didn't see me initially. I watched for 20 minutes before approaching. "And what did you say?" I asked him what he was doing there. Grandpa, cried. He said he needed to understand that every night since the hearing, he dreamed of you locked up in the Pines, alone, scared, abandoned, that those images haunted him relentlessly. He said the only way to find something akin to peace was to directly experience what it means to care for vulnerable elders he had planned to discard. Tears rolled down my cheeks without permission. How long has he been doing this? The asylum coordinator told me he started in November, right after the sentence. He goes 5 afternoons a week, 70 to 80 hours monthly, much more than the 60 required by your will. He does it without publicity, without seeking credit. He simply shows up, works quietly, and leaves. That information haunted me for weeks. Part of me wanted to believe it as a genuine sign of transformation. Another part remained skeptical, remembering past manipulations. Was it real remorse, or a calculated performance to eventually claim conditional inheritance? Edward advised caution. Andrew, 11 months don't erase 45 years of behavior patterns. Observe, document, but don't get prematurely hopeful. Real transformation takes years to verify. Jonathan was more optimistic. I've seen genuine redemption in people. It's not common, but it happens. Perhaps hitting rock bottom so brutally finally awakened something dormant in him. Paige provided me with monthly reports. Ethan continued his volunteering without fail. He had started weekly psychological therapy with a doctor specializing in the rehabilitation of perpetrators of family abuse. He lived in a tiny 300-square-foot apartment. He worked his administrative job without complaint, cooked simple meals, read books on gerontology at night. He also learned about the will through his lawyer, whom Edward formally contacted. His reaction, according to Paige, who saw him afterward, was a complete emotional collapse. "I don't deserve even that opportunity," he said, between sobs. "But I will take it. I will dedicate the rest of my life to trying to become the man Dad always believed I could be." In February, Paige brought me a manila envelope. "Grandpa, Dad asked me to give you this. He doesn't know if you'll read it, but he needed to write it." Inside was an 8-page, handwritten letter, the handwriting trembling, visible dried tear stains on the paper. I began to read in the privacy of my room that night. "Dad, I have no right to call you that after what I did, but you are the only thing you always were, my father. I, on the other hand, ceased to be your son the day I called you human waste. Those words I thought would give me power became chains I carry day and night. Every elder I help feed in the asylum has your face. Every trembling hand I hold is yours that I rejected. Every confused gaze of a dementia patient reminds me of the monstrous lie I invented about you. I don't sleep more than 3 hours straight. Nightmares are my only deserved company. I am not writing seeking forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I am writing because Dr. Allen, my therapist, says I must face the complete truth. I destroyed the most noble man I knew for a greed so stupid that I now cannot understand how I could value money over your love. Mum would be devastated. Paige looks at me with pity more than love. I lost everything, and that should be enough punishment, but it isn't. Because worse than losing material things is waking up daily knowing that I betrayed the only being who loved me unconditionally. I have started restituting money, $3,000 monthly from my $1,800 salary. I live on $700, eating rice, lentils, bread. I walk 2.5 miles daily to work to save on transportation. I am selling my remaining possessions, not out of testamentary obligation, but because I don't deserve comfort while you suffered because of me. Jonathan visited the asylum where I volunteer. He saw me from a distance without my knowing. Paige told me afterward. She said he would report back to you. I don't know if that matters. I do this because every time I hold the hand of an abandoned elder, I imagine it is yours that I so cruelly released. And in those moments, for brief seconds, I feel something akin to purpose. Dad, if you read this, I just want you to know you are right not to believe me yet. I don't believe myself either, but I will keep trying every day, for years if necessary, to become someone who perhaps one distant day deserves to look you in the eyes again without dying of shame. Your son, who ceased to be, but begs to earn that title again. Ethan. I folded the letter slowly, placing it in my desk drawer next to old photographs of young Ethan. I didn't know what to feel. Pain, hope, skepticism, wounded love, all mixed in an impossible tangle to unravel. When Jonathan arrived for lunch, I showed him the letter. He read it completely, leaving it on the table with a deep sigh. Andrew, this could be sophisticated manipulation, or it could be a genuine awakening. Only time will tell. I know. But Jonathan, for the first time in months, I feel something I thought was dead. A microscopic hope that my son is not completely lost. Paige arrived that afternoon with additional news. She had spoken extensively with Dr. Allen, Ethan's therapist, who, with her patient's permission, shared a professional perspective. Your father is experiencing what we call post-traumatic existential crisis. The weight of his actions has psychologically crushed him. He is in a genuine, painful process of ego deconstruction and value reconstruction. I don't guarantee success, but the effort is authentic. The following months continued in a similar pattern. Ethan maintained his job, volunteering, therapy, restitution payments, without fail, without excuses, without publicity. Paige kept me informed, but respected my need for emotional distance. In April, almost a full year since the beginning of this nightmare, I received a second letter from Ethan. Shorter, more focused, detailing lessons learned, caring for Mr. Ricardo, an 87-year-old patient with terminal Alzheimer's who believed Ethan was his deceased son. I hug him, Dad. I let him call me Michael. I give him the comfort I denied you, and each hug is my penitence and my education. That night, for the first time, I considered the possibility of eventual reconciliation. Not now, perhaps not in years, but someday, if Ethan continued on this path, perhaps we could share coffee in silence. It would not erase the past. I would never forget. But perhaps, just perhaps, we would find something new, built on the ruins of what was destroyed. I got up from the balcony when Jonathan knocked on the door. Life continued, day after day. Paige prospered, graduating with honors and accepting a job at the Elder Protection Foundation. Jonathan and I planned a trip to Philadelphia to revisit the building we constructed 4 decades ago. I wrote memoirs, documenting this experience, hoping to help other elders facing similar betrayals. And somewhere in New York City, my son cleaned the incontinence of an unknown elder, finally learning what human dignity means. I didn't know if this story would have a happy ending. Perhaps it didn't deserve one, but it had something more valuable, an honest ending, where consequences taught lessons that blind love never could. And that, I discovered, was enough to allow me to sleep in peace.